Hey everybody, it is Dak here from the Boys, and welcome to my Abyssal Sire guide. The Abyssal Sire is an Abbey Demon Slayer boss that lives deep in the Abyss. This is a pretty unique boss in terms of mechanics, and this is one of my favorite to fight. In this guide, I'm going to go through the requirements to fight the Abyssal Sire, and then the gear and the inventory that you should plan on bringing with you. Afterwards, we'll talk about how to actually get there and what the fight mechanics look like. I'll then do a full run on a typical fight, and then we'll talk about all the possible loot that you can get from the Abyssal Sire. To fight the Abyssal Sire, you need to have 85 Slayer since it is an Abbey Demon, but you also have to be on either an Abyssal Demon or an Abyssal Sire task to fight it. This is a melee guide, though if you plan on using a Twisted Bow, just replace your melees with range and the same idea is going to fit. 85 plus in each of your melee stats are recommended. Not that you couldn't kill the Sire with like 70s and Barrows gear, it's just not really worth your time with lower stats. For all bossing, the higher the better. If you're looking to camp a boss, you're going to get faster kills and use less supplies. I suggest having 88 Mage for Shadow Barrage. Technically the lowest you need is 52 since you just have to use a Shadow spell, but the Shadow Barrage is far more effective than a simple Rush or Burst. You also need to do Desert Treasure to unlock your Ancient Spellbook. Also in the Ancient Spellbook, you're going to want to use some Blood spells in here to heal during the end of the fight, so 92 Mage for Barrage would be very nice, but Blood Burst is going to work. It just heals you up a little bit slower. The rest of my recommended stuff is really more about weapons and gear, so let's go ahead and move on to that section of the guide. Here's a look at the gear setup that I currently use, and then a downgraded version that I would use. If you want a longer look, you should pause the video here since I'm going to break down each slot of my gear in the picture next. The Abyssal Sire is a demon, so the best weapon to use is the Arc Light. You can get an Arc Light by using Ancient Shards on a Dark Light. The Dark Light's a reward from the Shadow of the Storm quest, and you can get Ancient Shards as a drop from any monster within the Zaya Catacombs. You need 3 shards to make it an Arc Light, and every 3 shards is going to provide 1,000 charges. The Sire is weak to stab, but the Arc Light's a slash weapon, so it's actually slightly better DPS to just use your slash attack style if you're using an Arc Light, but legitimately it's only slightly better. It's like 0.1%, so you could choose your attack style based off what you were training if you're not 99 in your melee stats yet. The Grazi Rapier is the best stab weapon in the game, and like I said, the Sire is weak to stab. Even though it's pretty expensive, you don't need to charge it with any Ancient Shards. It's not degradable at all, actually, and it's not that much weaker than an Arc Light, so it's pretty reasonable for a replacement if you have the money for it. A more common replacement for the Arc Light would be a Zami Hasta, which is still a pretty powerful stab weapon, but a whole lot less expensive than a Grazi Rapier. You do have to do the fishing and the smithing barbarian training to wield the Hasta, but those are pretty easy to get done, especially if you've gotten to 85 Slayer. After that, I would go with an Abyssal Dagger, and then even Abyssal Tentacle or a regular whip could do some decent damage in here. Since you have to be on task for the Abyssal Sire, you should be wearing a Slayer helmet or a black mask. I do suggest imbuing whichever of these you decide to use, even though that only helps range and magic. There is a section of the fight that you have to use one of those two that we'll discuss a little bit more later. In your cape slot, the Infernal Cape would be your best option, but if you're somewhat of a pleb like myself, you could just stick to the Fire Cape. And if you still don't have your Fire Cape, an Arty Cloak has a stab bonus and a prayer bonus that will help out a bit. There's not a ton of options for your necklace slot. You have the Amulet of Torture, which is your best in slot melee amulet, followed by a Fury, which also has some nice defense bonuses and prayer bonus, so this is actually kind of nice for beginners if you're taking a lot of damage in there. If you're really broke, you could wear an Amulet of Glory though. The ammo slot, you can take the Rada's Blessing. If you have the elite version of the Blessing, it gives a +1 prayer bonus over any regular blessing, and it has that teleport option. Otherwise, any normal blessing, like a peaceful one, will do fine. In your shield slot, the Avernic Defender is your best option, followed by a Dragon Defender. A defensive shield like a DFS or a Crystal Shield is not a bad option if you have lower defense or you're getting your first few kills, since the Sire can do a lot of damage that can make it easier while learning. For your chest and legs, Bandos is definitely your top option. If you can't afford Bandos, you can replace it with any Barrows tank gear like Torags or Darox. Though for the chest piece, a Fighter Torso is a better option than defensive gear if you've done your Barbarian Assault. The Ferocious Gloves are the new best in slot melee gloves over the Barrows gloves. I do use range for one section of the fight, which makes it nice to have the Barrows gloves since they also have a good range bonus compared to the negative bonus from Ferocious Gloves. But if you have low range, it's not a bad idea to stick with just Barrows gloves. The fight is mostly melee though, so I just stick with only the Ferocious Gloves. You can also get lower tier ones in the recipe for Disaster like Rune and Addy and whatnot. They'd be a fine replacement if you haven't finished the quest, but get your questing done. In your boots, Primordial Boots are the best option, though they're currently very expensive. If you don't have enough for Prims, Dragon Boots will be fine. If you also can't afford Dragon at 85 Slayer, then something's kind of going wrong. But Rune Boots do have a strength bonus. They will work fine. There's not too many options for your ring slot. Your best bet's still going to be to imbue the Berserker ring. The new Brimstone ring's an interesting option since it gives both stab and slash bonus, meaning you'll have accuracy no matter what weapon you're using. And it also has a strength bonus from the unimbued Berserker ring. It's still not as big of a damage boost as the Berserker ring. It is an interesting option though, because you'd also get that extra range boost during the other section of the fight. But seriously, the imbued Berserker ring is going to be your best option. Let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of inventory setups. I'm going to start with what I bring with me to the Abyssal Sire, and then we're going to take a look at what I was bringing for my first trips, which has a little bit different of a potion setup. First, I have my Dragon Warhammer for my spec weapon. This is going to be used to lower the Sire's defense and could be replaced with a Bando's God Sword. If you don't have either of these, a Crystal Halley or a Dragon Dagger is not bad for dealing a little bit of extra damage. You gotta bring some range equipment with you, though some people go for a trident and mage gear instead. The blowpipe is highly recommended to speed through the first phase of the fight, and I've got an armor chest and legs, Ava's Assembler, and Pegasian boots, but these can be downgraded to whatever your best range gear is at the moment. The super combat potion is going to make a big difference in your damage output you have in the Sire, and you could potentially take a ranging potion with you if you're at low range, but your range bonus shouldn't be that big of a deal. The super restore potions are for restoring your prayer points, of course. They could be replaced with a prayer potion, but the restores give one more prayer point per sip. You can be poisoned in the fight, so I bring a Sanfu Serum, which is a combination of a super anti-poison and a super restore. You could just bring the super anti-poison, but the serum's going to help prolong those trips. I bring the Saradomin Brew mostly for emergencies, since the blood spells should be enough to keep me alive. Keep in mind, if you replace super restores with prayer potions and you're bringing a Saradomin Brew, you're still going to have to bring some super restores for it. There's a lot of running around involved with the Sire fight, so I bring 5 stamina potions. Usually I'm doing 1 sip per kill, but sometimes it's 2 sips and 3 kills. The runes that I bring are Blood Runes, Death Runes, Soul Runes, and Air Runes. You're going to be able to cast Shadow Barrage and Blood Barrage with these spells. The rune pouch is highly suggested so that you can only take up 2 inventory spaces. Final item I have here is my Max Cave, which I use for house teleports, so it can very easily just be replaced with some house tabs. Here's a quick look at the beginner's setup for the inventory. Mostly it's just a different ratio of potions, and then I've got a little bit of food stuck in there too. With less experience at the Sire, you're likely going to take some extra unneeded damage sometimes, so you should be bringing some more healing stuff with you and less restores and stamina potions. The exact amount of food and potions you're going to use though are going to be a little bit different trip by trip, so you're just going to have to adjust when needed. The Abyssal Sire lives in the Abyssal Nexus. The easiest way to get to the Nexus is through the fairy rings using the code DIP. It's possible to run all the way through the Abyss to get there, but it's going to drain your prayer and take a whole lot longer, so just go ahead and unlock your fairy rings if you haven't already. Once inside the Nexus, there's 4 different rooms with the Abyssal Sire in it, and you can use the eye outside of each room to take a look in there and see if anyone's in there before you choose which Sire you're going to fight. Make sure if you're going to hop worlds and look for an open one, you do it out here, or at least away from the Sire. There's a few attacks that it could be doing during the fight that if you hopped worlds and someone's in the middle of the fight, you could take a lot of damage. Let's go ahead and jump into the fight now. This is considered a 3-phase fight, but I break the last one in half, so we're going to be looking at it at 4 phases. Make sure your auto-retaliate is off for the whole thing. That is pretty important. When you enter the room, the Sire is going to be asleep on its throne. Any damage done to the Sire while it's on the throne is just going to be healed up, but you do have to attack it at least one time to wake it up and start the first phase. First phase, you don't actually fight the Sire yet. You have to kill the respiratory systems around the room. You can't hit the respiratory systems with melee, and even with range gear on, or if you decided to bring mage, you will notice that the tentacles nearby are going to attack you and stop you from hitting the respiratory systems for very much damage. The tentacles can hit you if you're in the middle section of the area. This is important for a few parts of the fight since they can hit up to a 30, so kind of get used to staying in this middle section when the tentacles are active. You have to stun the Abyssal Sire with a shadow spell to be able to attack the respiratory systems. Even though you can use any spell, the higher level ones have a better chance to stun the Sire, so it's highly suggested to use Shadow Barrage. Not only will you need less attacks, which will speed up the kills, but when you're close enough to the Sire, it has 2 attacks it can use during the phase. One of them spawns a small abyssal creature with 15 health. If this is spawned during the first phase, you want to KO it pretty quickly, especially if you have low defense, as it will soon turn into a fairly powerful Scion instead of just a little spawn. The other attack is going to spawn a poison spool under you, which can inflict not only some poison damage, but can actually poison you too if you're standing too close. Both of these attacks can be used on other phases, but it's very easy to avoid it on this phase because you just got to stun the Sire before it actually gets through its waking up animation. Once the Sire is stunned, you get 30 seconds to attack respiratory systems. You can usually kill 2 out of 4 before the Sire wakes up and you have to stun again. This can be different depending on your range level and your gear, of course. But during this phase, you could leave the room at any time, and the fight will be paused for however many respiratory systems you KO'd, unless somebody else comes in and kills it. Once you knock out all 4 respiratory systems, the Sire is going to start to get up out of its throne, and now it's time to start using melee. If the Sire isn't attacked for a full minute from this point on, then the fight will restart completely. This phase is pretty straightforward. Be sure you're protecting from melee, or else the Sire is going to hit up to a 60. It does hit through your protect prayers, but protecting melee is going to reduce the damage you take. The majority of the Sire's attacks are normal melee attacks at this point, But if you see the Sire sort of give itself a little hug, it's going to be using an attack similar to the first phase. Either that poison pool is spawning under you, or it's going to spawn a little creature. It's not as important to knock out the spawn immediately in this section, even though it's going to transform into that Scion over time. If you've got low defense and you're slow through the fight, you do want to focus on the spawns though, because they could start to overwhelm you. The Sire does attack slower than you, so similar to fighting Bandos or Zami, you can attack it twice and run under it right after your second attack, and then if you wait until your next attack is ready, you skip one of the Sire's attacks. This is very nice if you're lower defense or if you're running low on health and food. Overall, it's not necessarily needed if you're higher level, but still can get you through the fight with less supplies. Also during this phase, the tentacles will be inactive, which means that you can stand anywhere without getting hit by them, but they will be coming back later. Once you get the Abyssal Sire below half health, you have one more attack that'll automatically not do any damage, but it will activate the next phase in the Sire. Phase 3 is considered the last phase, but again, I'm going to break it down into 2 phases. The Sire is going to make its way into the middle of the arena, and the tentacles are now going to be active again, and they'll be active for the rest of the fight. During this phase, the Sire will be consistently spawning some poison pools every few ticks. They can be dodged by running back and forth on any 2 squares with a little bit of space in between them, preferably these 2 right in front of the Sire so that you can still attack it. It might take some practice to get the timing down. You just have to alternate attacking once and twice before you run away from the poison pool. The Sire can also spawn more of those minions to attack you. They use range and melee attacks that hit through prayer just like the Sire, but I throw that protect from range prayer on to reduce the damage a little bit. If you get at low health on any point in the fight now, you can use your blood spells in the spawns to heal up since they have awful mage defense. It is possible to safe spot them in the southern area of the room, but I find it's not really needed, and you don't want to stop attacking the Sire for too long since it regenerates its health pretty quickly, so just taking a few steps back and using a blood spell on the whole group of them is a pretty good way to heal up. Once you get the Sire under 140 health, you're going to need one more of those dud attacks that won't hit any damage, and the Sire will then teleport you right next to it. This is the beginning of phase 4, and this is where the Sire can use its one big knockout attack. It's going to open up its chest, and you just have to make sure that you stepped at least 2 squares back to avoid it, but if you don't, you can take up to a 72. This phase is very similar to the last one now, other than the poison pools. They will spawn at the same rates for the first 3 poison pools that show up on the phase, and then they're a little bit more random. This just means you need to be watching your feet more, and you should only be attacking once before moving when you're not really sure if another poison pool is going to come up. Again, if you're getting low on health, you can use Blood Barrage in the spawns, and this is the last phase, so once you get the Sire down to 0 health, you're all done. Some of you may be wondering about using your house and your ornate pool and whatnot to fill up your special attack bar. I'm going to talk about that a little more in the live fight, but now that you have a rundown on how the fight works, let's go ahead and get into that live fight. So I'll start off in my player-owned home since I do have a fairy ring in here. It is highly suggested to have high construction so you can get the fairy ring and the ornate pool. Though it's not necessarily needed. You can do 15 to 20 kill trips without the pool. They're going to be a little bit slower sometimes, but really not that much slower. It's not a huge deal, but it is convenient. Looks like there's no adventurers in the chamber, which honestly can change sometimes by the time you get there. People like to hop inside the chamber. It just doesn't make any sense to me though, because for one, you're putting yourself at risk. It can be in the middle of a fight when you hop into a world, and you can take some damage, especially when the chest is opening up from phase 3 to 4, and he's doing a ton of damage. I've taken some damage from that one hopping, learned my lesson, don't do that anymore. When you first walk up, it looks like it's awake, all the eyes are going. Actually, this one might be awake. Yeah, it looks like it already is, which to combat this, you would just need to run up and use a shadow spell attack right away. And now he's going to be stunned and those will fall asleep. But I'm not going to start the fight in this one though. I'm going to go to another chamber where it hasn't been started yet. Alright, I found one that's asleep so I can give an example of starting up the fight. I am going to drop a restore potion so I can put my range gear on. My quick prayers are currently on Protect Melee, Piety, and Preserve. To get the first attack in with a blowpipe, you do need to be on long range to be able to reach it. And then I'm going to immediately go to Rapid so that I only use the one dart. Almost use a second dart, not going to lie, I was a little slow. I'm going to go ahead and stun the Sire, and this will give me some time to start attacking the respiratory systems. You can get sometimes a third respiratory system in, especially if you're high range and you have some good range gear on you and you're using Rigor. Honestly, it's not that big of a deal though, since you generally can't get the 4th in there. It still takes 2 stuns, but if you get a little bit of extra damage on the third respiratory system from the first stun, that just means that you'll be quicker through the next stun. Oh, I might get the KO here. Nice. So there's 3 respiratory systems, and then it is starting to wake up, so I'm going to use another shadow spell. Whoop. Puts all the tentacles around the room back to sleep, and we can go ahead and attack this one. Honestly, I don't even need to use prayer because you got plenty of time. I'm going to sip a stamina potion though, because it looks like I am running out of run energy. Sip the stamina. I'm going to put on my melee gear and sip a super combat 2. Pick up my potion while I'm at it. Now I can turn on my quick prayers. I'm going to use one spec to see if it lands. I don't plan on using the second spec if my first Dragon Warhammer hit works, because that'll lower the defense by 30%, which it did not work, so I'm going to use the second one. And he's already spawning a spawn. 0 specs. That's alright. That'll make the fight a little longer, give me some time to actually talk about it. Though it also kind of sucks. At this point, I'm making sure to focus mostly on his arms to see if he hugs himself. I'm kind of breezing through the phase so far, but the moment he gives himself a little hug, he's right there. See, he's either doing that poison pool, or he's going for another one of those little spawns. He's right at 200 health, so I get one more hit. Nope. No. Come on. There we go. And this next hit will be a dud, won't do anything no matter what, but it'll put him into phase 3. Alright, I kind of butchered the last fight from this point on. Let's try this again. I'm going to switch over from protect melee to protect missiles, since I will have spawns attacking me now. And the moment I can run up, I can start attacking, and he's going to be spawning those poison pools. So the timing on this really isn't perfect, but you start to get a feel for when the pools are going to change sides, alternating 2 attacks to 1 attack, but you're not in that phase for very long. And since I kind of butchered the live version of this fight, I'll go ahead and voice over the last few seconds. At this point, the phase is very comparable to the one right before. You just got to make sure you're dodging the poison pools a little bit better than I just did there, and healing up when you need to. At this point, if I'm extremely low health, which I'm pretty low health right now, or if I have under 30 to 40% on my spec bar, then I make sure to go to my house. It's mostly about the spec. Using the Dragon Warhammer, I find 1 spec is plenty for the fight to be quick, so if I can avoid going to the house, it saves a little bit of time. But if I'm using a Bando's God Sword, usually you want to use both specs, and with the Crystal Halley and the Dragon Dagger, you can kind of play it by eye. The spec doesn't really matter that much, it's more about your health at that point. Let's go ahead and talk about the possible loot that you can get from the Abyssal Sire. With good stats and gear, it's very possible to average right about 20 kills per hour, and the average loot from each kill is about 50k, meaning 1 mil in loot per hour. The Sire has a unique drop with the Unsired that I can give at a 1 in 100 rate. You can turn this Unsired in at the pool by the Fairy Ring for a reward. The main uniques that you can get from an Unsired include the Abyssal Dagger, which is a very strong one-handed stab weapon, or a bludgeon piece. With 3 bludgeon pieces, you can build the Abyssal Bludgeon, which is the top strength weapon in the game, and you can never repeat a bludgeon piece, so once you have 3 of them, you can always make the bludgeon. The Sire has some weird drop rates overall with an Unsired reward, so it's obviously just estimates at this point, but you have about a 1 in 5 chance at the dagger, and about a 1 in 2 chance at a bludgeon piece. This would mean that you're going to get 1 dagger every 500 kills and finish a bludgeon every 600 if you get everything right at the drop rate. You can also get a whip or a jar of miasma, which really aren't too expensive, so we're going to leave those out for now. 500 kills is about 25 hours of the Sire, and the dagger is about 10 mil, which adds around 400k an hour. The bludgeon is going to take around 30 hours and costs about 29 mil right now, adding another 950k or so per hour. So at this point, you're getting around 2.3 mil in loot per hour if you're doing those 20 kills, which when you add in your supplies, you're going to drop a little under 2 mil per hour in profit. And of course, this means you have to finish a bludgeon, and you're getting everything right on drop rate. So clearly not every hour is going to be exactly 2 mil, but eventually you're going to get a drop that you can sell for 10 or even 30 mil. You can also get an Abyssal Head from the Unsired, which is around a 1 in 12 to 1 in 13 chance, or you can get the Abyssal Orphan, which is an Abbey Demon pet and is about a 1 in 25 chance when you turn in the Unsired. I believe that's all the information I wanted to give about the Sire, everybody. If you still have any questions of fighting the Abyssal Sire, be sure to leave those in the comments section below, or even any tips of your own. If you got some useful information, or you just enjoyed the guide overall, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more content. Thank you very much for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed, and best of luck on your Sire grind.